Welcome in, everyone, to the It's Official podcast representing First Bet and Express Bet. Jeremy Plonk alongside Jeff Siegel. We do this every Tuesday of the racing season. And special welcome to those of you watching the It's Official podcast within the first Breeders' Cup Wager Guide. We are set to go in the Wager Guide all the way through Breeders' Cup Championship Day, just a little over a week away now. Jeff Siegel and I take on 5 hot topics each week in this podcast. And this week, Jeff, there is a real theme towards the workouts for the Breeders' Cup because last weekend was the big one. 2 weeks out from the Breeders' Cup, that's when the serious works take place.
You know, this is like studying for a college exam or some kind of important test because the test will be on Breeders' Cup Friday and Saturday. And whether you pass or flunk depends on how much studying you've done. Yeah. Now, I wasn't a great student. I mastered racing form before I mastered algebra, I think. Yeah. But this is actually fun to me because we go back and we try to uncover some nuggets, some maybe things about each horse that maybe aren't readily apparent to the average handicapper. And one of those things is trying to not only watch the workouts, but then properly evaluate them and try to figure out who's coming up to the race as well as they need to be, and maybe those horses who aren't quite as sharp as the form would suggest. This is fun to me, and we've got a couple of weeks to go, and can't wait to dive in when entries are drawn next Monday.
Among the workouts we'll look at in this podcast come from Santa Anita, from Gulfstream Park, and Keeneland as well. The XBTV crew and the Breeders' Cup newsfeed will get you all up to date for all the more recent works as we get closer to the championship events. You can check those out within the Wager Guide and certainly at xbtv.com where you want to go to get all of the workouts. Nice sectioning of the workouts based on Breeders' Cup divisions and the like. So be sure to check out all of that content. All right, let's get to our topics on the board this week. And before we get to work on the workouts, let's talk about the first topic from the week being a recap from racing in Europe. It was the Champions Day, British Champions Day at Ascot this past weekend. And there's some races, even though just a few weeks out from the Breeders' Cup, expected to have implications on the championship events. Mainly of those, we have to look at King of Steel, winner of the British Champion Stakes, who might be wheeling back as a big-time player in the turf.
Point Lonsdale, King of Steel is staying on from the back, still got a bit to find though, and it's Via Sestina, the mare, who comes through to lead from Horizon d'Or. King of Steel is trying to reach them inside the final furlong. Via Sestina, here comes King of Steel under Frankie Dodori on the near side. Via Sestina by a half length, it's a neck, it's a head, and King of Steel, he gets up to win. He wins the champion, and Frankie Dodori, he salutes the crowd on his farewell ride and his favourite racecourse. It's King of Steel.
So, Jeff, what do we make of King of Steel possibly coming back for the Breeders' Cup turf? His chances?
Well, first of all, I want to make a comment about Frankie. I guess they don't have the internet or newspapers over there. He's not retiring, guys. That was last week's. It may not be his last ride there. Right. And in fact, I think one of the owners said that he didn't understand why he was in such great riding so great. He didn't understand why he was retiring. No, he's not retiring. Okay. He'll be here at Santa Anita, and in fact, he'll be in the Breeders' Cup and maybe on this colt, King of Steel. Now, granted, it was over a very heavy ground that is completely 180 degrees different than what he'll find at Santa Anita if he comes on this very glib, very fast turf course. But King of Steel won this race. He beat a great field, and he's not like he's a Johnny-come-lately. This colt was a very good second in the Epsom Derby earlier this year behind Augusta Renan. So it's not like he hasn't proven himself. And I don't know whether they had designs on really coming, but this was a win and you're in, so it's now a freebie. And 2 weeks back, we would frown on it, but the Euros don't care too much about that. So I hope he shows up. It would just add luster to the race. Right. And it's not like he'd be overmatched or anything like that. He's right there with these horses. Yep. And it was a good race for him, a soft ground notwithstanding.
And you talked about his second in the Epsom Derby. Auguste Rodin is supposed to come here for Aidan O'Brien to Santa Anita and be probably the headline act in this year's Breeders' Cup Turf. Let's go back to the Epsom Derby when these two squared off back earlier this year and talk about Auguste Rodin on the other side.
Here comes Auguste Rodin in the hands of Ryan Moore, beginning to burn down the outside from the Foxes. In behind these, passenger arrest is weakening. It's King of Steel that's come through to take it up. King of Steel in the hands of Kevin Stott, chased now by Auguste Rodin as they run down to the final furlong. They appear to have it between them. The big horse, King of Steel. Auguste Rodin is thrusting down the near side. Auguste Rodin begins to get up, and Auguste Rodin gains redemption in the Derby. Auguste Rodin, a 9th Derby for Aidan O'Brien, a 3rd for Ryan Moore.
And Jeff, if we would see these two back in the Breeders' Cup Turf, where do you give the edge at this point?
Well, I would give it to Auguste Rodin because of what he's done subsequent to that race. This is a horse that is just fabulous. He not only won the Epsom Derby, he came back and won the Irish Derby. Mm-hmm. And then he won a group race subsequent to that. After that. So I would think that Auguste Rodin, he's got such great acceleration. Mm-hmm. He's done very well overseas on running on left-handed tracks, so that's not going to be an issue. He can handle soft, he can handle firm, so that's not going to be. He's got a tremendous kick, but it's an elongated kick. I mean, you can make a move with this horse at the 3/8 pole and figure he's going to keep rolling. Mm-hmm. Of course, Aidan O'Brien, he's won the Breeders' Cup Turf 6 times. He knows what to do with it. I'm excited to see him. I mean, he had one poor run with something went amiss, but other than that, he's been thoroughly genuine, thoroughly consistent, and consistently earns great time form numbers. And actually, King of Steel, he didn't win this race, but boy, did he run a winning race. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a terrific race. Those two well clear of everybody else. I'd love to see these two horses get a rematch here in California with others that are just like them. I mean, they're not the only two. There are a few others in there that are coming, and I'm not even talking about the Japanese contingent. So, and not only that, but I'm not even talking about the American contingent, which may be as strong as it's ever been. This race is shaping up as one of the great Breeders' Cup Turf races in the 40-year history of the event.
Yeah, Up to the Mark is one of the best American turf horses we've seen in the last 4, 5, 6 years at least. And, he's bricks and mortar kind of quality, main sequence, some horses who have had a lot of success in the Breeders' Cup, but they are taking on some serious hombres from overseas this year. So what a great international showcase. And you mentioned Japan as well, what we could see in the Breeders' Cup Turf. Now, a little bit more fallout from Champions Day, one that ran and one that ran but really didn't run to talk about. The one who didn't run was the one in here for the Gosden family, that being Motashdaf.
Something like that.
Mostashadov. And Mostashadov is a horse who decided not to run in the Champions Day race because of the soggy conditions. They'll wait for the firm, and this Juddmonte International winner is another of superior class.
Well, yes. I mean, he was going to probably win that race. I mean, there were those who thought he would beat King of Steel, but once it came up really soggy, they didn't. They actually waited until after a couple of runs before they took him out and said, "Okay, we don't want to run on soft, but this is ridiculous," So they took him out. He's a brilliant racehorse, and he's right there with the others. In fact, he beat Paddington on the square in the. I believe it was at York. And he's also won at Royal Ascot. He won the Prince of Wales, and he won that from Stone last, and then he won the race at York on the front end. I mean, he's just a great racehorse. So throw him in the mix as well, and he's supposed to come because he didn't run last week. He kind of called an audible there, and he is a serious contender if he shows up with his best race.
Crouching low on Paddington. He gets to within 2 lengths. Frankie asks Mostadaf for more. Can Paddington get past? Nashua on the right is staging a challenge. The Fox is back in 4th. Mostadaf on down towards the last furlong. Paddington, though, pressing hard under the Moor drive. Nashua trying to burrow through against the rail. Mostadaf, Paddington leaning left. He got to his quarters. Can he get past? Frankie in front, punching away, Mostadaf, and it's a record-breaking Juddmonte International success for Frankie on his farewell.
Frankie's farewell tour has been pretty darn good across the world this year. You saw that in the Juddmonte International. Mostadaf, of course, my apologies on the butchered pronunciation throughout that one. One name I can pronounce easily is Paddington, though, and he was second in that race we saw in the Juddmonte International to Mostadaf. He came back and ran on the soggy going over this weekend on British Champions and just didn't fire at all, Jeff. So now what do we make of Paddington as a potential player?
There was suspicion that he wouldn't handle it. They ran him anyway. He got beat 35 lengths. He was slipping and sliding 50 yards out of the gate. The jock never let him run. It was a non-effort, but that might be good news because he didn't really even compete. He's relatively fresh, and he could come. They talked about it. I mean, Aiden, he said after the race, I'm not going to rule out the Breeders' Cup Mile. That's his trip, and he does like firm ground. So I love how he put it, though. He said, we'll let the lads decide later in the week. He calls the owners the lads. And so I don't know. I don't know if we'll hear much from whether or not he's coming or not till later in the week. But, boy, if he were to come over and run his race on fast ground, which we know he likes, he would add a lot of luster to the Breeders' Cup Mile, which is going to be a salty race to begin with. Add him to the mix, and now it's really going to be fun.
Yeah, he was in the mile division, and, he's going to stay in that mile type race if we see Paddington come for the Breeders' Cup. All right, let's talk about what's going on Breeders' Cup week and our schedule of events. We want to kind of keep you up to date with all of the news and information that's going on. Here's your timeline for Breeders' Cup 40. The pre-entry announcement comes up October the 25th. That'll be the day that the first Breeders' Cup wager guide early release is available. Go to news.first.com or firstbet.com, and you'll be able to download the wager guide within the app as well, or at expressbet.com. If you want to find it this way, it's first.com/guide. So a lot of different ways you can log in and check out the wager guide. Post position draw for Friday and Saturday's Breeders' Cup Championship races will take place on Monday the 30th. The wager guide will be updated with our handicappers in each of the 14 divisions, as well as our best bets from handicappers across the first family. All of the human picks will be in on Tuesday, October 31st for some Halloween treats. And then on Wednesday the 1st, the wager guide will be updated with the first bet artificial intelligence win projections for each and every of the Breeders' Cup races, as well as the undercard races on Friday and Saturday at Santa Anita. And of course, Future Stars Friday set for November 3rd on Friday, and then Saturday the 4th, the big one, Breeders' Cup Saturday at beautiful Santa Anita Park in Southern California. Let's go to our second topic this week on It's Official. Time now to talk some Breeders' Cup workouts. A couple that have us a little bit perplexed, Jeff. Should we be worrying about the works we've seen from a couple of classic contenders? Let's talk first about the Whitney winner, White Abarrio. This is him in action on October 16th. We don't have a work for him subsequently from the next week, because on Monday, on the 22nd, his work was scrapped. So this is the second time White Abarrio did not work on schedule. The vet scratched his work 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now he didn't work on Monday the 22nd. Should we start worrying about this horse?
I would. Now, Irad Ortiz was supposed to come out and work him on Monday. He got a phone call from Dr. Owen, said, don't come. I'm not working him. And that is not a good sign. Now, he was on the track Tuesday morning and looked okay, according to DRF. So maybe it was something that is minor, but you don't want any delays here. Now, he was supposed to be scheduled to work for Wednesday. We'll see if, as of this recording, we'll wait and see if he actually did. But when you have a this close and you miss a work, it's not because, I just don't feel like working him today. It's because I don't think I can work him today. That's a little different. And, he's already been scratched from the vet once. Maybe there's an issue that has popped up that we don't know about. But all eyes will be on him when and if he does work, next time, whenever that may be. And I'm worried. I'm not completely. Well, I am completely worried. Yeah. Not a thing about it. You don't need any hiccups at this stage of the game.
No, and look, the 1.25 miles has always been a question with White Abarrio.
Sure, that's a different issue, but you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And so, Are we going to see him get a ton out of the work, gallop out really strong, look like a locomotive, and think that he can get the mile and a quarter? I know you and I have talked about this on previous shows. It's not about now where he's going to learn to get the mile and a quarter, right? He's not suddenly going to get pumped up with endurance, but you want to see it on display. And he didn't gallop out much in that work there, particularly on the 16th. Now he's had another missed work. I mean, he'll get back to work this week if he's going to make the race, no question about that. So we'll get an update and we'll see what he looks like. But it is time to worry if you're in the White Barrio camp. I always just felt like he was better off in the dirt mile against slightly lesser competition at a shorter distance around 2 turns. Seemed like the better race for a horse who won the Whitney, who was, third in the Met Mile and ran a good race there in the 1-turn mile. It just seemed like the dirt mile was a good intermediate race for him. The Classic always seemed like it was a big bite to chew, and I'm not encouraged by what we've seen in the morning in terms of the missed days, and certainly what we've seen so far on video of his workouts. Another one that might be causing a little bit of concern, and the mile and a quarter was a question here going into the Pacific Classic for Go Rocket Ride, and he wasn't able to put the dent into Arabian Night in the stretch of the Pacific Classic. So, Richard Mandela's had to go to work on Go Rocket Ride and try to see what he can get out of this horse in terms of more stamina, stretch him out, get the mile and a quarter. What do we make of Go Rocket Ride's training? He's in the worrisome category as well, right?
This was ugly. He's the horse on the outside working with Salesman, who's a good workhorse. But Salesman could have won this workout by 10 lengths if the jock had let him run. And it wasn't like Go Rocket Ride wasn't asked. He was. And he only went 1:13.4. That's claiming time. And Salesman on the inside is being wrangled back and choked back to make sure that he doesn't leave his workmate, who's being niggled at here in the final stages. He puts his head in front. But watch the gallop out. You can watch Go Rocket Ride still being ridden out to the 7/8 pole. Mm-hmm. Go Rocket Ride is being pulled up, trying to be pulled up to a walk, and yet galloping out. You can see Mike Smith go to the whip a little bit on the outside to try to get his horse to get by the pulling up leader, who he can't do. Yeah. And then out to the 3/4 pole. I mean, Salesman is still being thrown down, and he's going to actually gallop out better. Now, Go Rocket Ride, I had talked about him last week, and he looked like he had missed the work. He actually did work in the fog, so that work was not recorded a couple of weeks ago. But then after that, he came down with a temperature that Richard Mandela disclosed, something that I didn't know. So that's actually worked almost as bad as missing the work. Then he comes back and he works like this.
Yeah.
And even Richard said after the work, it's still a little iffy now. I mean, I'm not sure whether he was blaming the slow work on having to be recovering from a temperature. Mike Smith said, well, he's not really a good workhorse. Yeah, I know he's not a good workhorse. That's true. But you can't work like this and then win the Classic. You just can't do it. Yeah. And I wanted really badly to like him. I really did. Yeah. I loved his race at Monmouth. I thought his Pacific Classic race was good. He was on the inside of the track, the slower part of the track. He still ran good. By Candy Ride, you expect him to get better and better. I wanted to pick him so bad, but I can't. Not based on this. Richard's going to work him back this weekend. Maybe he'll work better, but it's obviously going to be a shorter work, so we're not going to learn anything. Am I worried? You're darn right I'm worried.
And when you get worried about Go Rocket Ride and you get worried about White Barrio, that's 2 of the top 4 or 5 contenders on the tote board for this year's Classic. We said it looked like Arcangelo and the coming on Arabian Night, coming on in terms of his form, not his running style. He's going to be up to the front of the Classic, but those two look like they could really be separating themselves unless one of these Japanese imports is ready to, throw the hammer down. But amongst the American contingent, it's kind of Arcangelo, Arabian Night, and the gap seems to be widening to me.
And both those horses, unlike the one that we talked about, they are working unbelievably well. They couldn't be coming up to the race any better based on the workouts that we've seen. Again, you can check it out at xbtv.com. But, I mean, it's the complete opposite. So how do you go to the window and bet on White Barrio or Go Rocket Ride when you're watching the other two horses work lights out? It can't. I can't do it. Now, I can be wrong, and I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. But you got to go with what you got to go with, right?
That's what we're taking a look at. That's why we're going through the works that made us worry. And now let's talk about some that we liked, not completely in love with. We'll talk about the love affair in just a little bit in our next topic. But these are workouts that we liked over the weekend. distaff contender Clairiere. She's a veteran who's danced about every dance you could possibly dance for Steve Asmussen over the past couple years. She's been out at Santa Anita for a couple weeks working ahead of the Breeders' Cup. She's by Curlin, so Jeff loves that about her. Tell us how she's working here, Jeff.
She's working really well, and I'm curious to see how she will react to the to the Santa Anita main track. I mean, it's a little different than the back east, and she looks like she's getting over it really well. She went off slowly. She's finishing eagerly, mild hand urging. They want to get a good work in her, but they don't want to go 58 and change. That would be non-productive. So she's going to continue out to the 7/8 pole, and she has good energy. I mean, they want her to continue out and get the bottom that she might need. But after that, I thought that this was good. She looks like she's got plenty left in the tank. I expect Clairiere to bounce back with her best race. As a handicapper, you got to figure out where that puts her in the race, but I'm very satisfied with what I'm seeing from Clairiere.
And some news in that division for the distaff this week. It was announced that Nest would be entered into the Keeneland November sale. So maybe her racing career continues next year. Maybe she goes to the broodmare career at this point. But what we do know is the rivalry between Clairiere and Nest is on hold. They're not going to match up in the distaff. Clairiere will go there health willing. But it's over for Nest in terms of this season. And we talked about this kind of tongue-in-cheek about a week ago about how owner Mike Rapoli said not only is she just fine and she's going to go run in the distaff, she's going to be the favorite in the distaff. And you and I just laughed about that. And now he enters her in the sale a couple weeks later to, Pletcher said he might buy half of her back to run again. Why would you do? I don't understand that.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we suggest that she probably should be retired after her last race?
Yeah, we're good at that.
We're really good.
Remind people again. We're good at telling other people how to spend their money.
We're usually right, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, no, I think Nest is being in the sale. There's a partnership there between Eclipse Thoroughbreds, and Mike, and I think that they're going to let the marketplace decide what she's worth, and then it wouldn't be surprised if one or the other bought the other one out. Maybe one wants to breed, maybe one would rather run again. So we'll figure that out. But the bottom line is, based on her last couple of races, there would be no point in bringing her out here and and risking her going out with 3 poor runs. It's time to call it a day, I think, for her, and I'm glad they are.
That's news in the distaff division. Let's continue now with the works we liked over the past couple days. This one in Southern California for a Breeders' Cup Mile on grass contender, Exalted. Jeff, take us through this move for the training track at Santa Anita.
Well, I don't know whether the home turf advantage is going to be enough for him to make him a major contender or not, but I love the way he's training. Now, most trainers in California work their grass horses on the training track. And they do so because it's a little bit more firm surface than it is on the main track. And here's a horse that just loves the Santa Anita turf course. He's a pro. He maybe doesn't have the brilliance that some of the Euros will have, but he's going to be a decent price. I wanted to, he's the kind of horse that you throw in somewhere, maybe underneath or whatever. And I wanted to make sure that he was treating well. And he's very eager. You can see that 47-2 on this training track's good move. He doesn't really want to be pulled up. He's galloping out well. He's as happy and as sharp and as good as he can be. What that makes him, in terms of the competition is up to the handicapper. Right. But I can expect Exalted to run as well as he can run based on this work.
And those over-the-top turf courses, horses who like to get over the ground like they do at Santa Anita, have had some success when we're on the West Coast here in the Breeders' Cup Miles.
Sure, they have.
Let's see. Let's try to see if Exalted might be able to parlay some of those good works into a big price in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Now, one horse who will not be a big price, probably the shortest price on maybe any Breeders' Cup race, but specifically on Friday, is Tamara. She's the Del Mar debutante winner. She's 2 for 2 lifetime. And trainer Richard Mandela's had his struggles with Go Rocket Ride in the works in the morning. What do we make of Tamara, the big favorite for the juvenile fillies on Friday?
Well, for whatever it's worth, she actually worked with Salesman last week, the same horse that we just saw dust off Go Rocket Ride, and she was slightly second best in that workout. Now I understand why, because Salesman might be man o' war in the morning for all I know. But here's a work that was unplanned. You can see him work with a different horse here, a horse from a different stable. And she broke off behind him. And when you break off an eighth of a mile or farther from any horse, that other horse is going to stay with you because it's just that much easier to work a shorter distance. But obviously you like the workout. She's actually going to beat the other horse. She's going to be ridden towards the end. 112-3 out and 125 to the 7/8 pole. It was it's typical of what she's capable of doing. Now, Richard's training her a little harder than I would have expected him to do with a 2-year-old filly. But she's such a good mover, and she lengthens out, and she beats the workmate, which would have been a much, much greater distance between the two had they broken off together. Gallops out nicely to the 7/8 pole. You can't be any fitter than her. I mean, the fact that this work was 2 weeks before the race is good. I wouldn't want to have seen it like a week before, because it was a hard work. But she'll come back with something really easy this week and then be spot on. I agree with you. I think she's going to be probably the shortest price favorite of any race in the Breeders' Cup, based on her form and the connections and all that.
Juvenile fillies historically has been a spot for some of those very scant prices. And then when they don't win, the juvenile fillies is known for some of the biggest upsets in Breeders' Cup history. So we're probably looking at a feast or famine kind of tote board in this year's juvenile fillies. It's Tamara or somebody big who's going to pay some big digits. Okay, those are the works that Jeff liked for the Breeders' Cup in the past couple of days. Let's talk about a couple that he loved here. So who's on the love train for Jeff for the workouts? Practical Move, the horse who's won the Santa Anita Derby earlier this spring for Tim Yakteen. He is in the middle here amongst the two blue light specials, if you will. Practical Move between horses, back just one race since the spring after scratching from the Kentucky Derby. Jeff, he was good in his return race, and he's looking good in the morning.
Oh, I love this work because it's what I want to see. I don't want to see anything flashy. He doesn't go out and have to prove anything. He went 48-4. He's between. He's just galloping along. This is almost like a fast 2-minute lick, and he's got so much energy. He's going to hit the wire. He wants to beat the other two horses because he kind of thinks it's still a race. But watch him gallop out to the 7/8 and out to the 3/4 pole. This may have been a half and 48-4, but this is how some of the Euros train and some of the horses in the East. It's a half mile, but it's more like a 5/8 out 3/4. And he's just so full of life and so full of sharpness and vigor, and just doesn't want to pull up and galloping out full of run. And I loved his comeback race. He loves Santa Anita. He's a prototype miler. He won the Santa Anita Derby, even though he didn't really want to go a mile and eighth. I didn't think, but a mile is perfect for him. And with that prep underneath him and this workout, I absolutely love the work. I love Practical Move in the mile.
The first time I saw a work like that was Fusaichi Pegasus back before the 2000 Derby, where Neil Drysdale did not let that horse do anything until almost the wire. It was just like that. Gallop along, basically a 2-minute lick, and then hit the wire basically with a head of steam, go into the clubhouse turn and gallop out great. And that's just the way that, Fusaichi Pegasus trained. And if you looked at the times, you said, well, there's nothing really that impressive about it. But if you saw it, you knew what you saw. And that's the same kind of move there with Practical Move. The half mile or whatever it was on the clock really isn't the part of the work that was important. It was that last 50 yards and then beyond the wire where he really shined there. He looks like he could be a handful in the dirt mile.
Yeah, I believe it. I really think so. I think I don't know how well he would have run in the Kentucky Derby because I just didn't know whether he was a 1.25 mile horse. Maybe not. I mean, horses that can get a mile and an eighth aren't necessarily horses that can go 1.25 miles. But a mile is just perfect for him. And the way he breezed here, I'm fully sold.
A couple more on the love connection for the workouts. Let's go to Speedboat Beach. This is another one similar to what we're talking about with Practical Move, where there's a big gap in the race tab this year. But since coming back, this horse looks like the fall is the right time. Let's go to Speedboat Beach's workout here. This was from the gate, if I'm correct, by Breeders' Cup Classic winner Byron, and just cruising along here.
Yeah, this was in a spectacular work, not just because he worked so well and did it breezing, but he went so fast. I mean, it's one thing to go 111, which is what he did when you're, in company and driving and ridden out and taking the whip. And I've seen that. This horse looks like he's going in 14.
Yeah, that looks like a gallop.
It is. And this is the end of a 111 work. And that horse he tied into him into the far turn. So, I mean, it wasn't like it was close. Again, another situation where if he had worked with that other horse, an unidentified horse, it would have been 25 lengths. So, I mean, with that race under his belt, which he ran unbelievably well against older horses in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, and with the subsequent workouts since then, this horse is going to be a handful in the sprint. I mean, we don't know how good he is. It's not like he's some older horse with a bunch of races that we can say, he is what he is.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how. The horse is largely untested with a young horse with Baffert. I mean, to me, he's on form every bit as good as Grafong, who was a 3-year-old that Baffert trained and won this race here at Santa Anita. I think he's better, and he won it. So dangerous, really dangerous based on this work.
Yeah, 9 3-year-olds all time have won the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And we talked about this in one of our topics last week. I think it was our bonus topic, where timing races from the gate or from, the pole, with the run up as far as races go. Remember, this 111 flat workout, 6 furlongs, was from the gate. So it wasn't like when horses work, they're galloping like a half mile up to the pole where they take off. So they're already at 15, 20 miles per hour before they start to get going. This horse did that from a flat-footed start in 111 flat. So that was an outstanding work. And again, we're talking about a sprinter here, so the gallop out's not as important. If you saw like after the race or after the work there, didn't gallop out like with the same zeal that we saw with some of those 2-turn horses that are going to run on Breeders' Cup Day, that's fine with me. I don't need to see a big gallop out of a sprinter. I saw everything I wanted to see with that horse during the course of the work. So Speedboat Beach. And he's also effective on the turf. So he's got some options, Breeders' Cup. They wanted to throw him in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. That wouldn't be out of the question. But the money's in the sprint, and as well as he's run on the dirt as well, I think that's where we will end up seeing him. Now, one filly in the sprint category who she's hot or cold, Jeff. When she's good, she's really good. And when she's bad, she's really bad. Her name is Society. And in the morning, she was really, really good here at Santa Anita. She's another Steve Asmussen trainee. And you want to see one that looks good on video, you're getting a peek here.
Well, when she is good, though, she is a monster good, and she's won her last 2 starts as impressively as you could possibly do so. And she's training beautifully here. 59 and change, never asked to drop. They chirped to her a little bit past the wire to make sure she picked it up. But what a good athlete, what a good mover. And 7/8, even though she's won over a distance to ground, I mean, 7/8 would be a great distance for him. She'll obviously be in the front or very close to it. And the way she's training over this track, I mean, and with, Echo Zulu obviously not running. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the one who's going to try to beat her in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint.
She should be well set in there. And we always say this when it comes to trainers and trainer intent and what races they're going to place their horses in. Necessity is the mother of invention when it comes to that. When you had Echo Zulu, you're looking at your lineup and saying, she's my horse for the Filly and Mare Sprint. What do we do with Society? Do we try to stretch her out to the distaff? Do we cut her back? She won the race at Charlestown most recently, going 7 furlongs. But last year she won the Cotillion going 1 1/8, and they tried her in the distaff. Would they take another shot back in the distaff because they had Echo Zulu to go short? Now you don't have Echo Zulu in that race, and Society can run where she actually would fit best. And that's a dangerous thing, because I think she's going to be best at the 7/8 of a mile versus trying to stretch her out in the distaff.
I agree. I mean, this is it. I mean, that's why I love the work, because I loved her form. I loved her work. And so I love Society. I mean, and I'll see what the draw looks like and who shows up. But right now, man, I'm leaning her way. I can tell you that.
All right. We had works to worry about. We had works to like, and we had a couple works to love on this week's edition of the It's Official podcast. As we do each and every week, we're trying to find a star of tomorrow through the maiden ranks, or maybe a lightly raced horse. Could be a 2-year-old, could be a 3-year-old, but they're one that you haven't quite heard about too much yet. And we've been doing this for over a year straight and unveiled some real gems. Do we have another one in Nisos, a big-time winner in the career debut at Santa Anita for Bob Baffert?
Nisos goes on strongly, leads a half length now to Urban Legend down at the rail. Nisos, Urban Legend, 1-2, a big gap to the rest, and it turns into a 1-horse race as Nisos firing huge 5, 6, 7 lengths. A tremendous performance from Nisos, who gallops at first asking by close to 10 lengths. Tight photo for second between Urban Legend and Colorado Cruiser.
Sometimes you shade 109 on the clock and you say it was the track, not the horse. It's just really fast. But when you see margins like that and the field spread eagle, that's usually a sign it's the horse and not the track. Maybe a combination of both. But when you debut in 108.97 at Santa Anita, you've done something.
See, now Urban Legend was another Baffert horse in that race. He ended up second, got trounced by, what was it, 10.5 lengths. He was a $1.3 million purchase, Urban Legend was, the 2-year-old in training sale. And he's 10 lengths inferior to his stablemate, who's obviously very good. Now, the stablemate, he was a bargain purchase as a yearling. In the same sale, same Ocala April sale, he only cost $550,000. So, I mean, that makes the owner think, hey, I got the better of the two, and I spent 1/3 of the price. How about that? Now, Nisos is by Nyquist. He's out of a mare by Bernardini. The female family is light. There are no stakes winners in the first 2 generations. The third dam, you remember her, Jeremy, Unbridled Elaine, very top-class Breeders' Cup Distaff winner. So it traces well. She herself, the dam of 3 stakes winners, including a horse named Etched, who was a very, very, very good racehorse. And I mean, the family traces well. Nothing light in the first 2 generations, but I think Nisos is going to make this pedigree because based on this race and how fast he ran and who he beat, there were some really good, well-regarded horses in that race. Yeah. I mean, he looks to me like one of these. Put him on the list for next winter and spring. The way he ran and the way he's pedigree. I love Nyquist. I mean, he just a really good, strong stallion by Uncle Mo, top-class racehorse, and Nisos could be one of his better ones, if not the best, and when all the dust settles.
All right, write it down. Nysos, Nysos. That's the star of tomorrow for this week's edition of the It's Official podcast. That's going to wrap up our podcast. We do our handicapping podcast each and every Friday called First Call. Be sure to check that out for handicapping selections from Jeff and I. And each Tuesday, we're back on the It's Official podcast to recap 5 topics. Next week, it'll be Breeders' Cup Tuesday. We will have the fields drawn the day before. So we've got a complete Breeders' Cup preview coming for you and reactions to late workouts, Europeans arriving, post-position draw analysis, all that for you next week on the It's Official podcast. Thanks for joining us on our podcast normal channels, as well as those watching on the Breeders' Cup Wager Guide. Good luck, everybody, at Breeders' Cup 40 at Santa Anita.